Look inside any corporate boardroom, and you will hear executives discussing cybersecurity in the abstract. They are setting broad risk appetites and approving multi-million-dollar budgets. At this level, risk management sounds like a business strategy. The mandates are clear but high level. Protect the brand reputation, secure customer data, and avoid massive regulatory fines. But step out of the boardroom and down into the operational server room, and the reality of implementing that strategy looks entirely different. Here, security is tactical. Engineers are urgently pushing to patch specific software vulnerabilities, CVEs, and configure complex firewall rules before a threat actor exploits them. This creates a dangerous organizational disconnect. The executives and the IT teams lack a shared language to communicate what needs to be done and why. Without that common vocabulary, executives end up allocating their security budgets blindly, hoping the money stops a breach. Meanwhile, the engineering teams prioritize technical patches without understanding the overarching business context or priorities. A mature cybersecurity program requires an architectural translation layer. Organizations need a defined mechanism to map those boardroom fears directly to the specific firewall rules that mitigate them. In 2014, the U.S. Department of Commerce published the NIST Cybersecurity Framework, or CSF. It was originally built to help critical infrastructure operators, like power grids and water plants, secure their systems following a U.S. executive order. But its structural logic was so effective that it quickly achieved universal adoption across every industry. To understand why it spread so fast, you first have to understand what the CSF is not. It is not a prescriptive technical checklist telling you exactly which software to buy or how to configure a router. It is entirely different from exhaustive control catalogs like NIST Special Publication 800-53 or certifiable compliance standards like ISO 27001, which involve heavy machinery and expensive licensing fees. Instead, the CSF is a free, it is vendor-neutral, and outcome-oriented structure. Its specific purpose is to give you a way to organize and map the controls you already have against the outcomes you actually need to achieve. It accomplishes this through an overarching architecture consisting of three primary interlocking components. You can remember them with the mnemonic CTP, choose the priorities, the core, the tiers, and the profiles. The CSF acts as a framework in the truest sense. It doesn't build the house for you. It provides the structural scaffolding to organize the materials you already have. This horizontal timeline illustrates the framework's core. It maps desired security outcomes along the lifecycle of a cyber incident, before, during, and after. We start in the before phase, introducing its first two pillars, identify and protect. Identify requires knowing your assets, risks, and responsibilities. This is foundational because you cannot secure what you do not know exists. A firewall cannot guard a shadow IT server that nobody documented. Protect implements safeguards, like access controls, to contain an event's impact. But when an attack gets through, we enter the active during phase, governed by the detect and respond pillars. Detect focuses on noticing anomalies in a timely manner. This is critical because attackers often dwell inside networks for months. Your detection speed directly dictates the scale of the final damage. Respond covers the actions you take once an incident is verified, containing the threat and handling communications. Finally, we reach the incident aftermath, represented by their recover pillar. Recover is the process of restoring impaired services, coordinating with stakeholders, and applying the lessons learned back into your security plans so the same attack doesn't work twice. Zooming into a core function pillar, it branches into 23 categories, subdividing into 108 specific subcategories. At the ends are informative references, pointers linking CSF outcomes to exact technical controls in established standards like COVID-5 or ISO 27001. This hierarchical mapping makes the CSF a true Rosetta Stone. It takes abstract boardroom goals, breaks them down into specific outcomes, and links them to exact engineering standards. The second component of the framework gives organizations a way to measure their operational rigor: implementation tiers. The tiers operate on a 4-level scale: partial, risk-informed, repeatable, and adaptive. They evaluate whether your risk management is ad hoc and reactive or formalized and continuously improving.
It is a common mistake to view these exactly like a traditional maturity model, where the highest level is always the goal. NIST explicitly states that higher tiers are not necessarily better for everyone. For example, reaching Tier 4 requires a high degree of external participation, actively sharing threat intelligence with your partners and supply chain. That is a complex, expensive endeavor, and it is completely unnecessary for a local bakery or a small accounting firm. This diagram of intersecting lists introduces the final component: profiles. A profile is an organization's tailored selection from the core menu, determined by their specific business objectives and technical environment. Organizations build two profiles. The current profile is what they achieve today. The target profile is what they require. Comparing these two feeds a 7-step implementation cycle, culminating at Step 6, gap analysis. The mathematical delta, the exact space between where your current profile is and where your target profile needs to be, generates that gap analysis. Once you isolate those gaps, you can rank them by risk and cost, producing a concrete, prioritized action plan to close your vulnerabilities. This is how profiles and tiers function as an engine. They take a theoretical list of security outcomes and transform them into a prioritized, budgeted roadmap that executives can confidently fund. Global meta frameworks provide excellent structure, but they require adaptive localization to be effective. They have to be mapped to regional laws, regulatory environments, and specific national threat landscapes. A prime example of this localization in practice is the Swiss IKT Minimalstandard, published by the federal government in Bern. To protect the nation's supply security, Switzerland adopted the NIST CSF blueprint to establish a baseline for critical infrastructure operators, like energy and water utilities. The standard inherits the original 5 NIST functions almost exactly one-to-one, translating identify, protect, detect, respond, and recover directly into a German language framework. But it goes a step further in practical application. It concretizes the abstract NIST subcategories into 106 specific, measurable operational measures. What brings the standard to life is its self-assessment mechanism. It provides a ready-made Excel-based evaluation tool, allowing organizations to score their own implementation. This spider chart plots the evaluation output. It maps each measure on a 0 to 4 maturity scale, displaying an inner actual performance curve against an outer target boundary. Any space where the actual line falls inside the target reveals a gap you must close. This tool perfectly automates the NIST gap analysis process. It gives the board an immediate visual diagnostic of structural health without requiring expensive governance software. Identifying gaps is only half the battle. You still have to architect the solutions. The standard prescribes doing this through a philosophy of defense and depth. This onion layer diagram illustrates 9 concentric rings of overlapping controls. The middle layers represent the technical core, like network segmentation and firewalls, but the crucial revelation is at the edges. The outermost ring is risk management, and the innermost is the human element. Because these controls overlap, if an attacker slips past a perimeter firewall, they do not immediately gain total access. They still have to bypass hardened hosts, navigate network monitoring, and trick trained personnel. Of course, deploying 9 layers of defense is a massive undertaking. Smaller businesses without dedicated security teams can rely on pragmatic local alternatives, like the Swiss Information Security Handbook for Practice. These guides focus on essential, everyday security tasks and promote a philosophy of Mut zur Lücke, the courage to intentionally leave gaps. For an SME, attempting to implement heavy enterprise-level compliance will paralyze the business. It is safer to focus on a pragmatic minimum. Ultimate security engineering is not about blindly checking off every box in an international standard. It is about purposefully right-sizing your architectural framework to perfectly match your organization's unique risk profile and resources.